NBC's Raf Sanchez is covering this story from London. Also with us, Peter Baker, chief White House correspondent for the New York Times and an MSNBC political analyst. And Joel Rubin was Deputy Assistant Secretary of State under President Obama and is currently author of the Briefing book on Substack. Okay, Peter, how do you read the president's remarks today?
Well, look, obviously we know hasn't changed. This is exactly who Vladimir Putin is and has always been. He's been sending rockets into civilian areas of Ukraine now for years. What's happened is, of course, that Trump has discovered that Putin doesn't want peace. Trump told voters time and time again last year he could make peace in Ukraine so easily. It could happen in 24 hours. In fact, he would do it even before he took office, before his inauguration. Obviously, that hasn't happened. So since Trump doesn't want to have to acknowledge that that was wrong, that he didn't have the magical ability to stall this war with the snap of a finger, he has to explain it by saying, well, obviously Putin has changed. He's gone crazy. Look, the fact that he's feeling frustrated at Putin is, in fact, a turning point. This has been something we're seeing in the last few weeks where he's expressing more exasperation with Putin, more of a recognition, it seems, that Russia is not sitting there waiting to make peace, that Russia, in fact, was the aggressor in this war to begin with, something that the president hadn't acknowledged at first.
All of this does come, Raf, a week after the president said Ukraine and Russia would, quote, immediately start negotiations toward a ceasefire. What's happened on the ground that might change that calculation, or has it?
Yeah, Chris, what a difference a week makes, right? Last Monday, President Trump spent 2 hours on the phone with Vladimir Putin. He said it was an excellent discussion, and he came out of it saying that Ukraine and Russia were going to move immediately towards direct negotiations on a ceasefire. And a week on, none of that has happened. Instead, we have seen Russia unleashing some of the largest aerial bombardments on Ukraine since the beginning of the war. Over the weekend, according to Ukrainian officials, Russia firing some 700 missiles and drones at cities all across the country, including Kyiv. You look at some of the footage of Kyiv, and it looks like wartime London or something. You have searchlights scanning the skies for these incoming drones. You can see those are civilian houses that are on fire there. The Ukrainian government says at least 18 people were killed in that bombardment, including a number of children. And we should say, Chris, that some of these ballistic missiles are coming from North Korea. Some of these drones are based on Iranian design, and the Russians are firing them in much, much larger numbers now than they were before. And it is really not clear whether the Ukrainians are going to be able to keep up with this level of intense aerial attacks going forward. Now, the big question is whether President Trump's angry words yesterday are going to be backed up with actions. We have heard President Zelensky pleading with the United States to impose new sanctions on Russia. NATO allies in Europe are saying the same. So far, President Trump not committing to that. Chris.
Raf Sanchez, thank you for that. So, Joel, assuming the president now believes that maybe Putin isn't the man he thought he was, what does this mean for negotiations, and what should it mean for U.S. strategy going forward?
Yeah, Chris, it's great to be with you, and forgive me for chuckling a bit. It's as if Donald Trump finally got the memo. My God, did he just realize that Vladimir Putin is unjustifiably attacking Ukraine? It's kind of preposterous. I think that Vladimir Putin is playing Donald Trump for a fool and has him running in circles when it comes to the negotiation track. And there's only one direct way to stop this, and that is to get tough on Putin. That is for the United States to realign ourselves with our allies in NATO, to share intelligence in a way that is not threatened every other week if the president doesn't like what Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine says, to coordinate with the Ukrainian military, and to offer up supply. And that's the key thing that Raf mentioned. There needs to be clarity that we are going to continue to supply Ukraine's military indefinitely in order to put pressure back on Vladimir Putin. I fear that that is a bit of the squeeze that Putin is hoping for with these heavy bombardments and drone attacks, that maybe we'll just stop supplying Ukraine, then he'll get the advantage. But that all needs to make itself clear, and that's how we get this realigned and back onto a potential diplomatic path.
So, Peter, let me play some more from exactly what the president had to say about what he thinks happens now.
You mentioned you're unhappy with President Putin. You've talked before about putting more sanctions on Russia. Is that something you're considering more seriously?
Absolutely. He's killing a lot of people. I don't know what's wrong with him. What the hell happened to him, right? He's killing a lot of people. I'm not happy about that.
So you know Russia well. You worked in Moscow for years. First, Putin killing people isn't new. Do you think any of what the president is saying, even the threat of sanctions, will in any way change Putin's strategy going forward? What might be something that would get this headed in a different direction?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I've covered Putin now for 25 years. He hasn't changed. This is exactly who he is. He's always killed people. It used to be in small numbers, and now in the last 3 years, it's been increasingly in larger numbers. And he sees that to the advantage of Russia. And he will only make a deal if he sees it to the advantage of Russia. I think to Joel's point, Putin's calculation here is that the United States won't, in fact, continue to ship arms to Ukraine. In fact, may even cut off intelligence help, which has been very critical to the Ukrainian Defense Force's ability to fend off their invaders. He is gambling that Trump gets tired of this. He gets impatient with this. And as Trump himself has said, walks away. If he walks away, does that mean he walks away from peace talks, or does he walk away from Ukraine altogether? Putin's gamble is he walks away from Ukraine altogether, and that Russia then has the ability to make much more significant gains on the battlefield while Trump has decided he's not going to be involved anymore.
I mean, these attacks, Joel, as you know, on Ukraine are devastating. We saw the impact. We heard about children being killed, but you don't gain territory with missile strikes. In fact, the Washington Post put it this way today. Over the past year, Russia has taken only 0.6% of additional Ukrainian territory at the cost of 1,500 killed or wounded per day. That's according to current and former Western officials. The Wall Street Journal says Trump told European leaders he thinks Putin thinks he's winning. Is he?
It sure doesn't look like it on the ground, but what he is doing is terrorizing the Ukrainian people. To your point in this data, look, Vladimir Putin can't take Ukraine militarily at this moment. But as we're discussing over time, if he gets the signals like he's been getting from President Trump and his team that we're not really backing Ukraine militarily, he may very well get there. And so now he's puncturing, he's pushing, he's terrorizing Ukraine civilians, trying to soften them up, trying to defeat their will. Clearly, they have strong will in Ukraine, and that's really what's made the difference in this war. But, this is a period where maybe he can't get the ground, but he can certainly harm the Ukrainian people's feelings and sentiment. And I think that's what we're witnessing right now.
And Peter, we barely mentioned the third person in all this. At the same time that Trump was admonishing Putin, the president also went after Volodymyr Zelensky, writing that everything out of his mouth causes trouble. That, of course, came after Zelensky put out a message insisting that America's silence only encourages Putin. Do you have a sense of, or what is the White House sense of the relationship between Trump and Zelensky right now?
Well, look, Trump doesn't like Zelensky. Let's be honest about that. That's always been the case. He has a long-time fixation on Ukraine that was fed by people around him that follows the train of thought that Russian propaganda has put out, which is that Ukraine was the one that was interfering in the 2016 election against Trump, not Russia for Trump. And basically, this goes back now 8 years. So in his mind, Ukraine is a corrupt country. Ukraine, in fact, isn't really even a viable independent state. Trump has long bought into the Russian line that Ukraine doesn't, in fact, have a history of independent identity, that in fact it is a vassal, if you will, of Russia. And so, yeah, he doesn't think very highly of Zelensky. Zelensky has played Trump a little bit more cautiously in the last few weeks since that meltdown in the Oval Office along the lines that European allies have advised him, trying not to poke the bear too much, not to anger Trump too much. But there's no love lost there by President Trump for President Zelensky. So I think even as he's criticizing President Putin, which is a new thing, really, he feels a need to sort of both sides it and make sure to also say President Zelensky is at fault.